Welcome to Ask SME Anything. Your chance to ask the ITProTV subject matter experts questions live. Here's your host, Don Pizzette.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Me Anything, the show brought to you by ITProTV, where you, the viewers, get to ask questions of our subject matter experts. We know that when you're out there studying, you're working hard, you're trying to learn, advance your knowledge, advance your skill set, that sometimes questions pop up. And who do you turn to? Well, not a cold, lifeless book. You need to talk to a person, and our people are here at the studios each and every day, so we thought, why not take some questions, right? And that's what Ask Me Anything is all about. You, the viewer, can jump onto social media, post your questions there, use hashtag AskSMeAnything. Our social media team picks up on that. They bring the questions, harvest them, collect them together, send them over to us, and then we put them up against our subject matter experts. All you have to do is use that hashtag Ask SME Anything. Also, if you're an ITProTV subscriber, you can use the ITProTV Q&A. If you go to the ITPro.TV website, you'll see a link for the Q&A up in the menu at the top. You can jump over to the question and answer forum and throw your question there. We monitor and answer those pretty routinely, as well as drag those questions here onto Ask Me Anything. So 2 different avenues to get there. Obviously, we want to answer everybody's question that's possible, but if we don't get to your question live during the show, first off, sorry. Secondly, we do want to get you answered, though. Throw your questions out there anyway, and we'll just take them and bring them into the next episode of Ask Me Anything. We want to make sure that everybody gets the help they need to be successful in their IT career. All right, well, let's talk about who our SME is this week. And here in studio with me, I have Ms. Cherokee Booth.
Hey,
Cherokee,
Don. How's it
thanks
going?
for joining us.
Yeah, always.
So we always have a lot of fun when you're on the show. We talk about a number of different topics. Your primary area of expertise, though, is pretty much the Microsoft world, right?
Yeah, I mean, just normal networking, some security, mainly Microsoft, a little bit of project managey type stuff, Lean Six Sigma.
All right. So if you have questions that are in those areas, you can throw them at us while we're live. We'll answer them right here in the show. If you have questions that are outside of those areas, again, don't hesitate to ask them. We have plenty of experts here in the building, somewhere around here. I can always drop somebody in, and we'll just drag those questions into the next episode. So be sure to throw those out there. Again, that's hashtag AskSMeAnything. Well, Cherokee, why don't we kick this thing off and jump into our first question of the day? Looks like we've got a Microsoft Active Directory question. This is coming from Jeremy. He asks, what is the primary function of the domain controller in an Active Directory domain? Sounds like a pretty important role, right? Being the domain controller. So what is its primary function?
So I'm assuming that Jeremy already knows what a domain is, because the definition of a domain controller is kind of pointless unless you really understand the logic behind the structure of an Active Directory domain. And the primary function, in my opinion, would be the authentication and authorization of users, groups, service accounts, some type of object that is requesting access to another Active Directory object. So it's basically, I think that, in my opinion, is the primary function, although there are several other functions that can be dealt out by your domain controller. It's a central repository. It stores all sorts of information about the objects within your domain, and in addition to some of those access and authorization type information, those access control lists, you'll see things like your security policy, different group policy that can be pushed out. So really, you can do a lot of maintenance, so you can have centralized management with your domain controllers. But if I had to narrow it down to one thing, probably the authentication and the access that it provides. What do you think, Don?
Yeah. I mean, if you were to take away that centralized authentication, you'd basically be back to a work group at that point, right? And with work groups, you had separate user databases on each and every endpoint, which is a nightmare to manage in any large environment. Having an Active Directory ties it all into one centralized location. That makes life so much easier. So I'll agree with you on that. But I am glad you mentioned the other functions, because there's other functions the AD performs that are important, but maybe not as to the forefront. So, for example, a time server, right?
Yeah.
Every domain controller can act as a time server. And then there's other functionality like that. I'm trying to think.
roles?
Oh yeah, all the FSMO roles. Yeah. Do you have those memorized?
Oh, don't put me on this spot.
I know. I don't think I can name all 5 of them either. I know there's the RAID master. There's the
PDC emulator.
The PDC emulator is pretty important, right? Which is where that time server role comes in.
Yeah, that's what made me think of that one specifically. The other ones, I'm like,
The infrastructure master, which is responsible for setting up your replication topologies. Let's see, I already said RAID master. I feel like I can say it more than once. If I were smarter, I'd be Googling here in the background.
I know, I'm like, oh, sorry.
But anyhow, each one of them does perform a particular role. The schema master is another important one because it's defining all the attributes that you keep track. We talk about authorization, right? So that makes me think username and password. But Active Directory store is more than a username and a password for each record, right?
Yeah, and you can even, I know your favorite, Don, integrating hello for business with Active Directory. You could even have additional types of information there. I see, are you typing? Are you Googling those?
I absolutely am.
Goodness,
Because I can't remember off the top of my head. So we're right on track. We named the PDC emulator, the RAID master, which I didn't say what the RAID master did, right? Which every user account, every object in the Active Directory, so not just user account, but computers, OUs, every one of them has an identifier attached to it. And that identifier is a combination of the domain SID and the object SID. And those domain SIDs are actually generated by the RAID master. So the RAID master is pretty important. We said schema master. I left off domain naming master.
Okay.
It's not one that gets used very frequently, but in fact, if you have one domain, it really never gets used. But as you add more and more domains, it makes sure you don't have duplicate domains. And there's one more. Who did we leave off? Infrastructure, we said. And actually, I guess that was all 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. That was all 5. All right.
Good job.
Yeah, there we go. We were only off by 1. Not too bad. How many IT people does it take to name the 5 FSMO roles?
Oh my gosh, this is sad. I know. Hopefully the next question's a little more forgiving there.
Well, let's find out. Let's jump up over to that second question. This one is, we're moving out of the world of Active Directory.
Okay.
Parker out there on Twitter asked the question, are there different types of Hyper-V?
Okay.
All right, so Hyper-V, I know that is the, Type 1 hypervisor that's available from Microsoft. So I'm not sure what they mean by different types here. Do you know what they're going at?
I'm going to assume here, Don, and because we are, Hyper-V is Microsoft's virtualization product, but there is a specific standalone product that Microsoft has, the Hyper-V server that you can download for free, and it acts as a host for virtual machines. But it's going to be a command line interface, so we don't see those graphical elements there. And then we also do have 2 different types of Hyper-V if you want to think about it, because we have our server installations, Don, so we can run and manage Hyper-V on the server. And then you can also have Hyper-V installed on the client. And there are a few differences. I don't know if it would be... you'd have to really take a comb and granularly go through and see if there's any features. I can't remember off the top of my head. But on the client side, it is a bit of a more slimmed down version there. So I don't know if they're talking about that versus probably having that standalone operating system that you can download and use there.
Yeah, I know as far as comparing Hyper-V on a Windows desktop versus Hyper-V on a server, it is actually the same Hyper-V engine. It's identical. But you're losing features like the ability to do clustering and replication, live migration. You can't do that stuff. Obviously, you would need a cluster, and a desktop can't join a cluster. Right. So all the enterprise features are really dependent on the server operating system. But as far as Hyper-V itself, that stuff all functions pretty much the same on Windows 10 as it does on Windows Server 2016. But I am glad you mentioned the Hyper-V server in the very beginning, right? Which we used to always call the Microsoft HVS or Hyper-V server. You said how it was basically a core install. You just get command line access. But I don't think you mentioned that it's absolutely free.
I don't know if I did or not, but that is really cool. It is free.
Unlike all the other server platforms and stuff, it's free, but it is core install only. And it doesn't support clustering. There's various things that it won't do. But if you just need a Hyper-V server up for cheap, then there you go. Now, keep in mind, if you start throwing Windows operating systems on there, you'd have to pay the license for your guest. But if you wanted to bring up a bunch of Linux boxes on top of Hyper-V, you could, and it would be absolutely free.
That's true. Just don't try to use that platform for some other purpose, because I'm pretty sure in the EULA that one, it actually defines how it should be intended to use for that virtualization purpose.
So you mean like if I were to install it and maybe not use Hyper-V, but try and install other services on it?
Yeah, just try to do anything. Maybe try to hack it up to be a file server, something like that. It's just not, that violates their licensing agreement for that product. It seems like it'd be more work than, but I don't know.
Yeah, I always felt like they were trying to compete a bit with like Zen Server and ESXi, where VMware ESXi is technically free if you just want to throw ESXi on, but to have that vSphere management center to be able to control the whole thing, then all of a sudden it's tens of thousands of dollars and it just goes through the roof. So, it's Microsoft trying to maintain a good competition there, which is a pretty cool thing. All right, well, we've gone through a couple of questions now. I do want to remind you, if you have questions, please feel free to share them with us. Jump out there on social media and post them with hashtag #AskSMeAnything. Oh, I forgot.
Yes.
Hashtag
I'm so
Ask
glad
Me
you
Anything.
remembered,
There we go.
John.
I gotta make sure we do our proper hand gestures. For those of you who are just listening instead of watching, you can
I hope
imagine.
that's not some kind of like gang sign that we're really
It probably is. I'm probably going to get killed by some cartel now. But that's all right. So let's move on to question number 3 before we get in some real trouble. And this one is some networking. You mentioned that networking is one of your other areas. So what information is required when TCP/IP is configured on Windows Server?
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and assume we're just speaking vaguely or a generalized question here. And when you're configuring your TCP/IP settings, if you're using like IP version 4, which still a good majority of people are, I would think it's safe to say that you would need the same information that a client would need. So your basic info, like your IP address, if you're setting that statically, you would need to have that subnet mask there, your default gateway if you tended to leave that network, and your DNS routers to go ahead and communicate locally. And if you were talking about specifically about machines that handle IP addressing like a DHCP server, then that would require additional information like your scopes and so forth. But for the most part, you just have to think about those common things that you would need.
Now, let me bounce this one off you, Cherokee. There's
Sure.
there's a debate that's been going on in the sysadmin world for years and years over whether or not we should use static IPs on our servers or whether we should just use DHCP reservations on the servers. Obviously, if we do a static IP, every time the server comes up, it's always going to have the same IP address, and there you go. But if we wanted to change something like DNS servers, we would have to go and modify all of our servers, which would be a pain.
Right.
If we go with DHCP, we could change the DNS servers really easy, but if the DHCP server were ever offline, potentially the servers might lose their IPs. So what is your thought? I've worked in both environments.
I was going to say there's a good argument from either side there, and I think that really depends on the dynamic nature of your environment. If those servers are changing often, then I would say to go ahead and create those reservations. But I don't know. It's kind of one of those preferences. I like to set even in my lab environments, I set my servers with static IP addresses. And that's mainly so I can remember who is who. And I think in a real life environment, that's also one of the main reasons why someone would do that, so that you have that stability and people can get familiar and know where to look for a certain network resource. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, and you mentioned dynamic because I hadn't quite thought about that. Normally I'd be right along with you that, yeah, we do all statics. That's the way, because I want to know, and I don't want to be dependent on a DHCP server. So there we go. But when you mentioned dynamic, I immediately started thinking about the cloud. And when I deploy stuff in Amazon's AWS, I almost always use dynamic addressing, right? Because you want to be able to fail over between regions, and who knows what the IP is going to be, or if you scale up. So maybe the difference there becomes if it's like on-premises servers,
Ooh,
if
I
they're
like
physical
that.
servers, you go static.
That's a challenge that I've personally have found, that I have to retrain my brain to think in a more broad mindset, because I think for so long I just got stuck in an on-prem mindset. And so now sometimes I have to, I'll catch myself, oh no, wait, there's so many other ways that could be configured or deployed. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and then you throw in the hybrid cloud, and then things really get confusing, because now you might have some servers are static and some are dynamic based on just whatever their role is. Domain controllers, though, you usually don't want their IP
Static.
addresses to change.
Yeah.
DNS servers, those you really need to stay static, because if they change, who's going to look to them? IPv6 fixes a lot of this, but if you're not running IPv6, doesn't help you. So all good stuff to think about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Cherokee, let us move on to our next one. This is funny because we were talking about some disk issues the other day. We were talking about storage spaces. So I know storage is on your mind,
we were.
which lines up with Thomas's question. We were talking about the pain of dealing with storage.
It was a pain. So we'll just go ahead. Full disclosure here. I was having an issue with a demonstration, and I was trying to assign the media type to virtual disks to fool the operating system so it would appear as if they were solid state or a magnetic drive, so I could implement tiered storage in a demo. And it wasn't working. Dawn, I don't even know what time it was. I finally figured out what I had done late at night, and poor Mike and Adam got the brunt of my frustration because I was just messaging them in Slack, and of course they're like not even responding throughout the day. I'm just venting here digitally to them. And then finally, at like 9 something or 10 something, you have to add the disks to a storage pool. And I know this is so totally like off, topic, well, kind of here, but you have to add the disks to the pool before assigning the media type. So that's kind of crazy. You can't assign the media type with the disks outside of the pool.
So you did finally get it to work? You actually tricked it into thinking they were SSD?
Yeah, well, because I know I had it working before, and I just didn't take good notes. So moral of the story, take good notes.
Take good notes. I've tried to do that exact thing myself, and I never got it to work. So kudos to you on that one. All right. Well, let's we got off the beaten path of Thomas's question, so let's jump back over to that question. And what he was asking was, what is the difference between RAID and JBOD or JBOD or just a bunch of disks, depending on how you want to say it? What's the difference? Because they all amount to a bunch of disks.
This is true. And I think that the biggest difference between RAID, and since Dawn gave the definition or the full name for that, if you don't know what RAID is, it's redundant array of independent or inexpensive disks, depending on who you're talking to. That's a whole nother story. I think is going to be flexibility. There was more of a rigid structure focused around RAID configurations, such as storage sizes, RPMs. Sometimes you'd even see, recommendations for the same manufacturer. So you wanted to get those disks relatively similar, whereas we can integrate different bus types, sizes, speeds with JBODs to be more flexible and I guess just kind of work with what you have there, whereas RAID has to be a little more surgical or planned out.
Well, I know RAID can provide a lot of advanced functionality. It can provide you redundancy. You can span volumes across disks with it. You can get higher performance out of it. Mm-hmm. JBOD doesn't do any of that, right? You can't span data across more than one disk. You don't get any redundancy. It's just they're all independent, right?
Just the pool. But when you combine, when you take that concept JBOD and then create storage pools here, and my mind is automatically drawn to the Microsoft implementation. I'm sure there's several other vendors out there that have something comparable, but you utilize storage pools, and then you can have all those things that you just mentioned. So in the past, I was a big RAID fan, okay? And I know that sounds cheesy, but it's true because of all those great features you just mentioned. And software implementations, like when we would use disk management to try to go ahead and create span volumes and simple volumes, it would get the job done, but not nearly to the precision that we saw with our hardware implementations. But I do feel like significant strides have been made with storage pools where we can leverage things like the tiered storage that we were talking about beforehand to kind of level the playing field there.
Now, storage pools, they have redundancy. I don't know if it's turned on by default or not. Is it where they always store at least 2 copies of the file? Isn't that what it does?
So you're actually prompted. It's not automatically. So you'll select your layout. There are 3 different layouts. Simple, and that's going to be like a RAID 0. Okay. No, you just see the performance increase there. And then you have mirrored, and depending on how many drives you have, you can create a 2-way mirror or a 3-way mirror. You have to have at least 5 disks to create a 3-way mirror, but that would allow you to suffer from 2 drive failures. So it's kind of like the mirroring, like a RAID 1, and then different types of RAID configurations we would see there. And then the third layout option would be parity. And that would be comparable to like a RAID 5 or other RAID configurations with the striping and the parity there. So you are prompted to select that, and that is all contingent upon the number and type of drives you have. So the operating system will kind of prevent you from over provisioning or over allocating yourself for these certain layouts.
All right. Now, I know I've kind of stayed away from storage spaces and storage pools because it's really doing software redundancy. And with RAID, we usually have a hardware controller that's in there that's doing the parity calculation or whatever. And in my experience, your performance of the hardware controller is going to be better than using software because it's just using the general purpose CPU. What's your experience been? I'm sure that technology is advanced.
I don't think that it has surpassed a hardware RAID configuration, but I definitely see it could be getting there. And the other benefits that it offers, such as, combining storage pools with REFS, that's going to be a added bonus there, because a lot of this info can be detected by this system and handled automatically. You have the option to set your drives to be handled manual, reserve them as hot spares, or have the system automatically decide how those drives should be handled during a catastrophic drive failure or physical drive failure. So it kind of automates things a little bit more than, but I don't know.
Now, you mentioned REFS, which was introduced in Windows Server 2016, if I recall correctly, but not really popularized. If you did a storage space, it did format your drive with the, do you say REFS or REFS?
Well, I think that's just...
Which one's the right one?
I always say REFS, but resiliency, so resiliency file system, RE, because it's lowercase e, capital R.
Yeah, so I guess it would be REFS.
Okay.
Like you had a file system. We're going to do the file system again. It's all right. Well, either way, I haven't. Microsoft Ignite is coming up next week, right?
Yeah, I'm so excited.
And I suspect Windows Server 2019 is going to be big on the talks. A lot of people are going to be out there. REFS was released with not a whole lot of fanfare in Windows Server 2016 several years ago. There were rumors that they were going to make it where you'd finally be able to boot off of it, which up until now it had to be storage disks.
So
have you heard anything more on that?
I haven't. So I'll come back with the scoop, though. I'll definitely put that on my number of questions that I have for everyone. And if you are going to be in Orlando the week of, what's that Monday, the 24th?
Oh, now I have to know dates. It is. Yep, Monday the 24th.
Yeah, so that week, so the 24th through the 28th, definitely. And we're also going to be hosting a meetup. This is such a shameless plug here, but it's next Tuesday on the 25th at Ember in Orlando. So for our members, and there's if you hop on over to our social media, there's a link for you to RSVP so that we can account for you, and we'd love to meet some of our members that way.
Yep, be there or be square. It's a good chance. Cherokee will be there, so you'll get a chance to meet her. Mike Roderick will be there as well. Probably a couple other people. Just depends. Yeah. Orlando's just down the road from us. So. But always a good time. All right, well, speaking of good times, if you want to have a good time, send us a question on social media using hashtag #AskSMeAnything. Not the best segue that I've ever done on this show.
But okay, I see what you're doing there.
I know. For a good time, call hashtag #AskSMeAnything. So throw your question up there just like Sean did when he threw up this question. What is the purpose of deploying local DNS servers if they exist throughout the internet? And this is a great question because I think we all know there's like level 3 or CenturyLink, whoever has the 4.2.2.1 and 4.2.2.2. Google has the 8.8.8 and 8.8.4.4. Cloudflare now has 1.1.1. So you've got these public DNS servers that are available to anybody. Why would we want to maintain our own DNS servers?
Well, that's a good question, Don, because everyone in the world should know about me, right? But the truth of the matter is those guys don't really care so much about the little people. And, you know what? I think I might need to draw this one. It's kind of one of those visual type things. So if I can share my screen, that would be super duper. And so this will be fun. Going back to, it seems like there are a lot of triangles in computing in IT, Don. At the top here, you have your roots, and that's my root in quotation marks. Oh my gosh. So let's just leave it as a dot.
Yeah. Like, I'm not quite sure where that became quotes.
Yeah. Our root servers, there are 13, the A through M, that are going to be at the highest point of our DNS hierarchy here. And then underneath them, if we look at the layers, we would have like our TLD for our top layer domains. And those are going to be like your .coms, .edu. And as you continue down this progressive pyramid, you would have, I don't know, like a second layer here. It would be like Microsoft. So a lot of the bigger corporate entities, and it would kind of go down until, well, whomever you purchase that domain space from. ITProTV is a little bit different because of the, isn't it like Tuvalu or something?
Yeah, it's a country code. So those are top level domains. At the TLD side, .com, .net, those are all the main original ones. But then there's the two-letter country codes,
like EU, UK, or is there an EU? I know there's a .uk.
I don't think there is a .eu because each country has their own. .de for Germany.
That
so
Brexit's kind of messed us up here. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the EU is not a country. It's
anyways,
strange.
But those top level domains don't care about, your smaller domains. And that's where the DNS servers are going to be authoritative and holding that responsibility so that the hierarchy of things can really work in the way that it was intended to defer those queries to the authoritative DNS server. Excuse me. And they could answer those queries. So if you're on a private network, how would the rest of the world know about all the IPs of your private addresses and so forth? So I can see where it would be a little bit confusing there. But that's just kind of the way it was designed. And it's always good to have at least more than one DNS server locally in case one of them do fail, unless... going back to that other question we had, if all of our devices were set static, then we wouldn't even have to worry, right?
Well, I know I can think of a couple of reasons why you might want to maintain your own DNS server.
Okay.
One is DNS servers are a great target for attack. If an attacker can get in between you and your DNS server...
I remember the entire East Coast like a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
Remember when that happened?
Yeah, there was a DNS cache poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
It was a type of attack where you would do a DNS lookup for, donsbank.com, and it would send the wrong IP and redirect you to an attacker's site. So if you control your own DNS servers, you can help prevent that. Now, if you're still doing a recursive lookup against the public ones, you haven't really helped. You could use it for caching DNS lookups. So if they're all cached locally, you'll get faster lookups that way.
True.
But the number one reason I can think of for running your own DNS servers are private IPs. If you actually sit down and read the standard, a public DNS server is not allowed to respond with private IPs to a DNS lookup. One of the best examples, Amazon's Route 53 does a great job of following the standard on a lot of things. Microsoft lets you cheat the standards in a number of ways, but AWS doesn't. And if you create a record that resolves to a private IP, it'll block it. It won't let you respond with it. So if you're, really cool. In theory, you shouldn't be letting people out there on the internet know about
your
internal hosts.
Organization. Yeah.
So a lot of places will maintain two sets of DNS servers. Internal ones just for routing those private domains, and then public ones that just have the public IPs for their public domain. So, a number of different reasons that are out there. I know also like some of the registrars, when you go and register a DNS domain on like some public service, they may not support subdomains. And so now if you want to have subdomains and replication, you have to kind of maintain your own infrastructure. There's a number of different reasons, but honestly, if you can get by with just using the public ones, you should, because it's one less thing for you to maintain.
I like your thinking, Don.
Good arguments either way. So,
all right.
Any
more questions?
Cherokee, that looks like the last question that I've got in the hopper for right now.
What's a hopper?
The hopper is like a queue of,
okay.
I don't know, I didn't make the word up. Now, we already mentioned that you're going to be down at Ignite.
Yep.
And we encourage all of you out there in TV land, if you happen to be at Microsoft Ignite, definitely go and try and meet up. Oh,
747 is the booth number.
well, that's easy to remember.
I know. That's
Yeah.
the only reason why I remembered it.
But I also want to say that if you don't make it over there, don't sweat it, because Cherokee's going to be back. And I'd love to get a recap with you and kind of go over some of the cool things that you found that are over there.
That's definitely on the horizon.
All right. So if you hear any cool announcements out of Ignite and you want to know more, make sure you ask the question by using hashtag AskSMeAnything. Check them out there. We'd love to talk about it. And we'll have Cherokee back on the show. I think we have Ronnie and Daniel are up next in the Ask Me Anything rotation. But we'll get Cherokee back on here. And Mike needs to be on sooner or later. I haven't talked to him in a while. So rope him into the show too. But Cherokee, you have anything else you want to share with our guests before we wrap up?
I think that's about it for now, Don. These lights, and it's hot in here, so I think we're going to go and get some air.
Yeah, we are at the peak of the Florida heat, so it's awesome. So ask us about anything except what it feels like to have nice, cool air conditioning. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to thank you all for watching. Remind you to take advantage of hashtag AskMeAnything. But that's it for this episode. I also want to remind you, if you want to learn more about any of the technology we talked about, be sure to visit ITProTV. If you go to ITPro.tv, you can see our entire course library of numerous topics, including setting up DNS servers, configuring Hyper-V.
Oh my gosh, I remember I did a show, Bind, with you. There's so many different types of DNS. We don't just focus on Microsoft.
Absolutely,
so.
Yep. But if you do want to focus on Microsoft, we've got it. And the Storage Spaces episodes Cherokee was mentioning, those are there as well. And we have a number of free webinars that are going on. If you ever go to itpro.tv/webinars, I think it's, /webinars, you can see our upcoming webinars. We have one coming up tomorrow with this guy on top 5 DevOps blunders. Definitely register for that. It's absolutely free. If you can't make it live, no big deal. It'll be recorded. You can watch it there, itpro.tv/webinars. Be sure to check it out. All right, well, thank you all for watching. Cherokee, thanks for joining us in studio.
Thank you, Don.
All right, everybody, and that is it. Signing off for ITProTV. I've been your host, Don Pizzette.
I'm Cherokee Booth.
And we'll see you next time.
Are you enjoying Ask Me Anything? Then be sure to check out our other podcast, TechNado, where we take a look at the most interesting tech news stories from the week and interviews from people in the industry. Here's the latest episode, and here's the full playlist. And as always, be sure to subscribe to ITProTV's channel. ITProTV!